Hello, listeners! We are absolutely chuffed you've decided to join us. Grab a packet of biscuits, brew a warm cuppa, and curl up for a wholesome American conversation about quintessential British food from everyone's favourite baking competition. Please enjoy! Hats off to Bake Off, an amateur baking podcast.
Off to Bake Off, an amateur baking podcast. My name is Nick, and I'm here with my friend Malory, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different than our normal ones. So in the first of our 2 bonus episodes to finish off Series 5 of the Great British Bake Off, we are here to discuss something that's near and dear to our, and probably many Americans' hearts, chocolate chip cookies. So we weren't even 5 minutes into our first sort of real episode for Hats Off to Bake Off, episode 0 introductions, when we said this.
This is important. The best brand of chocolate chip cookie or the best recipe. You're saying it's Toll House?
I mean, I'm a little bit, biased because it is my mom, but they are pretty wonderful.
This is fair. I just have to say I'm a Betty Crocker stan. Betty Crocker's chocolate chip cookie recipe is
not the one from the bag, but
the recipe in Betty Crocker's cookbook is the best chocolate chip cookie recipe, hands down. I'll have to make it for you.
We'll wait for a bonus episode before you make that.
Wonderful.
That's not very British, but we'll go with it.
It's not British at all, but I just needed to know that about you. It says a lot about a person, what their favorite type of chocolate chip cookie is. So I stan Betty Crocker, and Nick grew up on Toll House. So today's episode will be teaching you the history of Toll House and Betty Crocker and sharing our cookie baking stories. So chocolate chip cookies is probably the thing that I bake the most, hands down, of anything else. I have grown up with the Betty Crocker chocolate chip cookie recipe. I've baked it easily more than 100 times. I have the damn thing memorized. It's such a staple. And I'm assuming you have a very similar story with a Toll House recipe as well.
I'll say that I don't bake cookies regularly, but only because my mom bakes them so regularly. My mom makes them for pretty much every holiday. We've even gotten one of my Aunt Suzanne, requests every holiday that we make a couple of cookies that are just the cookie dough without the chocolate chips in them because they're that popular at holidays. Well, I understand the love of the dough. It's not a chocolate chip cookie without chocolate, and I like mine full of chocolate.
I think then there's this other sort of, I almost said conspiracy, and that's not the word I was looking for. Wait, help me. What am I trying to say? Controversy. I'll just start from the top. So there's this huge controversy, I guess. The next step is, do you like your cookies crunchy or chewy? I am 100% on team chewy. I tend to slightly underbake mine on purpose to leave the centers nice and gooey. I don't like them like fluffy or cakey. I still like them pretty flat and baked, but just like gooey and chewy in the middle.
I'm right behind you. I don't like them cakey or big and thick, but I do kind of like a crispy cookie. There are some cookie chips that are just these thin little tiny rounds of crispy chocolate chip cookies. Oh my God, they are so good. I'm so upset I can't eat them anymore because there's so many carbs. But if you can, go find them because they're perfect. They also have like snickerdoodle ones or a bunch of other flavors that are amazing. Kind of along the vein of like a brownie thin. But I like them crispy sometimes, otherwise chewy all the way.
Yeah, my mom likes them crispy, and so I always have to like leave if like a cookie recipe usually makes about 3 batches, I would say, like 3 baking trays worth, and the third one I always leave in the oven a little longer so that like she has her own crispy ones that she can eat, and then the rest of us get chewy ones because everybody else in my family likes chewy cookies.
Okay, is it only chocolate chip, or do you go for anything else sometimes?
I mean, I'll make whatever. I would say that the most popular thing, I think what makes it so popular for me is because at this point I do not have to think about it, and we pretty much always have all the ingredients we need. So if my family, if anybody's like, I'm craving something sweet, the answer 90% of the time is some chocolate chip cookies, just because they're done in 30 minutes or less. and there you have it.
If you're real good, what you do is you make it ahead of time and store it in the freezer.
Yeah.
And then you can have it anytime.
So really when that ends up happening for me, it's usually like late at night or it's after dinner and we're like, oh, we really want something sweet. And then I'm the baker in the household. So it's like, oh, Malory, make some chocolate chip cookies. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I get like halfway through and I roll out half the dough. And then I'm like, oh, I'm tired. And then they throw the rest of it in the freezer. And so every once in a while there's like
totally valid.
Yeah, leftover cookie, like too lazy cookie dough in the freezer from when I like rolled out half of it. And I was like, yeah, this can wait. We don't need this many right now. I'm tired.
I only mention it because I'm a big fan of like double or triple chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, yeah.
Which is when you like add either white chocolate or dark chocolate and like flavor the cookie dough with chocolate. Such a big fan of those. I recently went to a wedding where they had lemon and white chocolate cookies.
Yum.
Oh my God. I've said it several times in this podcast that I don't like lemon. This changed my world.
Yay.
I need to make lemon and white chocolate cookies very shortly because they're spectacular.
Wow.
Quick update from future Nick. I did make them and they were spectacular.
Yeah, I will say probably my other favorite cookie recipe. My mom went vegan for a hot second, and although she isn't officially anymore, we still eat a lot of the recipes that she learned during that time, and a few of them are actually dessert recipes that are really good. And there's this one vegan recipe, I think it's from the Veganomicon for the vegans out there who have that cookbook. It's a double chocolate cookie with walnuts in it, and so it's like you add cocoa powder, so the actual dough is chocolate, and then you add chocolate chips and you add walnuts, and they're so good and like yum. Wow. And they have a little bit of almond extract in them, and that like gives it this other sort of like,
so it's like nutty and chocolatey.
it's
that
so
sounds
good. Oh, yum.
I should say this episode was going to be, I was going to make Betty Crocker's recipe and Malory was going to make the Toll House recipe, until we realized that they're basically the same recipe plus or minus an egg.
I felt so silly. I still feel silly. I've always been so adamant that Betty Crocker's the best recipe, and then we looked at them, and boy, is there minimal difference. I think yours has Toll House has some vanilla, an extra egg, and more salt, which is so funny because I always talk about how Betty Crocker's recipe is like the perfect amount of salty and has just enough salt. And all the time, Toll House actually had more salt and not less, which is what I thought. Anyways, I felt like a dingus.
What's even funnier is I'm going to talk about the history of Toll House, and there is a connection to that.
Oh my gosh. Can't wait.
Remind me to say that when we get through
Okay,
all the
I'll
history
try my
bits.
best.
So the episode today is going to be all about the history of Toll House and Betty Crocker, because they're kind of family names, and we don't have any other bakes from the show to talk about, but we still wanted to talk about our two other bakers. So we decided to go with this one. What better place to start than with possibly the invention of the chocolate chip cookie, which all starts at Toll House Inn. So you've seen the Toll House chocolate chip cookie recipe on the back of Nestle chocolate morsel wrappers probably your entire life if you're in America. I don't know if Nestle has it in other places.
Nestle is everywhere.
But would the recipe show up on other packaging in like Europe?
Mm.
Exactly. If we have listeners from Europe, I know we have at least one listener from New Zealand. Let us know if they still print the chocolate chip cookie recipe. It is an American favorite, but I think it's also an international success, so hopefully you can tell us. This story is about Ruth Graves Wakefield. Ruth and her husband Kenneth bought a small tea house on a main road between Boston and Cape Cod in order to start the inn of their dreams.
Oh, I had no idea this story took place in Mass. That's amazing.
We're getting there. With very little money, they started a restaurant with only a few tables and barely enough dishes to plate them all, located at 362 Bedford Street in Whitman, Massachusetts. So I looked it up. It is a 40-minute drive from where I live. Not saying where that is, but it's real close.
Here's my really street address. Please hit me up. Come knock on my door.
But yeah, I definitely considered driving down to Whitman to look at the site of where this building was. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, but I'll get to that in a bit. So this is more about Ruth than about the house. Ruth had been a talented home economics teacher at a local high school, and Kenneth, her husband, had been an executive for the meatpacking industry. So when the restaurant opened in 1930, it seems like a great idea, but it is right in the middle of the Depression. Possibly not the greatest time to start a restaurant business, but the Depression did birth a lot of really successful businesses during that time, due to mostly the rise of the middle class and the automobile, and just everything about it kind of did help a lot of businesses during that time. And so is the case with Ruth's restaurant. So they wanted it to be an inn, but it really took off as a restaurant. Quickly, the business was growing, and so was the Toll House Inn restaurant. The Wakefields continued to add both additions to the house, just like one after another, to incorporate just more and more tables, as well as quadrupling the staff over the next 3 years.
Nice.
Not bad at all. She was always there, always greeted the guests, was the head chef at the restaurant for a long time. And I think that's basically what made the restaurant so great, was that she was always so hands-on. The restaurant was known for its hospitality, its amazing desserts, and comfortable atmosphere, which was all engineered by Ruth herself. She was a perfectionist and demanded nothing less from her employees. So it was said that waitresses had to train for 3 months before even being allowed to take over 2 tables at the night shift. She expected all of her waitresses to have freshly pressed clothes, memorize orders, and immaculately set every table.
I would not do well there.
She had high expectations, and I think for the best, because it worked out pretty well for her. The Toll House restaurant invited everyone from Cole Porter and Ethel Merman to Eleanor Roosevelt and the Astors. I think being on that main road from Boston to Cape Cod just kind of helped them out a lot. But really above it all, Ruth was renowned for her ability in the kitchen. Reporter Ernie Pyle once said, "Ruth Wakefield can cook by taste." So she would travel all around the world, and she was able to recreate a dish in perfect proportion with ease. She constantly made amazing recipes, and plenty of people adored her desserts. John F. Kennedy Sr. would come in regularly for a double slice of Boston cream pie.
Wow.
And this might be a whole episode later on. The young food critic Duncan Hines adored her Indian pudding.
Whoa.
So she was all the rage for a while. I said JFK Sr. was there. He sent gingerbread and cookies to his son, the future president, while he was away in the war.
Wow.
It was just known by everyone. But here's where some of the Toll House lies begin. Oh, the lies, the lies.
The lies.
There's there's countless lies in the history of the chocolate chip cookie.
What? This is not what I expected.
Exactly. Why is there so many lies? And let's start with the basic one. The one that even Nestle Toll House, with double trademark symbols, says about the invention of the chocolate chip cookie. You'll read again and again that the chocolate chip cookie was made by mistake.
That's what I thought.
Right?
I thought that. I was about to be like, I don't know how it was. Oh, okay. Untrue, apparently.
I'm sorry to burst your cookie bubble, but we'll get there in a minute. The NestleUSA.com, I got this from their website. In 2014, they had like the 75th anniversary of cookies or something. I didn't really look.
There were no cookies before then. Americans made them. We have a bad habit of doing that, don't we?
Go listen to our biscuit episode and you'll learn a little bit more about cookies and cookies.
Cookies.
Oh, actually, it says right here. Nestle Toll House is celebrating 75 years of the chocolate bit that dropped its way into the kitchens and memories of American families everywhere. The Nestle Toll House Real Semi-Sweet Chocolate Morsel. The Nestle Toll House story begins with chocolate chip cookie inventor Ruth Wakefield, who ran the successful Toll House restaurant in Whitman, Massachusetts. So far, so good. One day, while baking a batch of butter drop dew cookies, a favorite recipe dating back to colonial times, Wakefield broke a bar of Nestle's semi-sweet chocolate into tiny pieces and added them to the dough, expecting to create a chocolate cookie. I assume you can already see the problem with this story.
Yeah.
But I'll continue. Instead, the semi-sweet bits held their shape and softened into a delicate, creamy texture. Wakefield's Toll House Crunch Cookie recipe was published in a Boston newspaper and quickly became the trending cookie recipe everyone was baking. So while the beginning and the end of that story are correct, the middle is chock-a-block full of lies.
So I guess I always what made me assume that this was true, because first of all, being a baker and understanding how chocolate works, I feel like you would know that no, if you put a bunch of chocolate in something. I mean, maybe this is because I grew up baking chocolate chip cookies, but I wouldn't assume that the chocolate would melt anything. But I could assume that like some sort of witless home baker was like, I don't know, I'll just throw this in there and then maybe it'll become all chocolate. But knowing that it was a world-renowned chef, and I'm expected to believe that she didn't understand that that's how chocolate would function, I don't buy it.
Exactly. I don't know if she was world-renowned at that point. For a long time, chocolate chip cookies were like a New England fad. But she still was very well trained. She would have known that it wouldn't have worked, especially since she has other recipes that she eventually would publish later on in life, where she melts down baker's chocolate and pours it into the cookie recipe to make chocolate cookies. You wouldn't just break up chocolate and pretend that it's going to melt and make the whole cookie chocolate. That's not how chocolate works.
No.
And I think Ruth knew that. And so, food historian Joyce White from Maryland agrees. She breaks down several of these myths on her blog, A Taste of History with JoyceWhite.blogspot.com. While I appreciate the work, Joyce, please work on your website. It makes my soul hurt.
Oh no.
It is the most upsetting, disorganized website. And then she also has another one. It's I think it's just A Taste of History with JoyceWhite.com. That's also a disaster that looks like it's from the 1990s. She's still making these posts. These aren't outdated posts. They just look so sad. But anyway, she has some really great points. I'm going to talk about them real quickly. So the number one version of events, as you saw in the Nestle storyline, is that she was making butter drop dew cookies. And Nestle suggested it's colonial, while the furthest back you'll see anything similar to that is the 1796 American Cookery, which is one of the first American cookbooks. And it's listed as butter drop dew. Number 3, rub 1/4 pound of butter, 1 pound sugar, sprinkled with mace, into 1 pound and 1/4 flour, add 4 eggs, 1 glass of rose water, bake as number 1. Which, again, sounds like an old-timey recipe, but doesn't sound like chocolate chip cookies. And one of the, how do we say this, culprits of spreading falsehoods about chocolate chip cookies, factsaboutchocolate.com, because evidently that exists, they incorrectly guessed that this is the third version of butter drop cookies. But really, in the American Cookery, it's listed, among other things, in a section about cakes, and it's the number 1 that it refers to are gingerbread.
Oh.
So gingerbread cakes or butter and sugar gingerbread. So really, she was making a variation off of a gingerbread, just minus the ginger.
Mm-hmm.
But also imagine
Instead,
a
mace.
cookie with rose water and mace. It just seems a little weird.
I don't know really what mace tastes like. It's not super popular over here. I'd be curious,
no
but
idea.
I mean, I don't know. I can imagine it working.
Anyway, the one thing I did want to mention, because this is actually a really cool bit of baking history, is that Joyce says in her blog that the D-O or do, spelled D-O dot, is shorthand for ditto. So as in 1 pound flour, 1 ditto sugar would be 1 pound sugar. And so this makes sense. There's the butter drops are a copycat recipe of the gingerbread with some alterations. So in the same cookbook, a butter drop is listed below biscuit and butter biscuit. And so this is just saying we're making a butter drop variation of gingerbread.
Oh.
And you're just going to bake it the same way, but you're going to use different ingredients.
Huh.
And so whenever you see a butter drop do, it's just like a ditto of a previous recipe. But also, as I said, it's in cakes and it's around gingerbread, and there's regular cakes mixed with somewhat cookies. It's not super helpful. And it doesn't sound like the recipe that we're thinking about when we make chocolate chip cookies. So with all that in mind, One version of the story goes she was making a recipe of chocolate butter drop dew when she reached for the baker's chocolate and found that she'd run out. Instead, she just happened to have a bar of Nestle's yellow labeled chocolate. And in some stories, this bar of chocolate just happened to be given to her by Andrew Nestle. I don't know if Andrew Nestle ever existed, but that's what they said. And so she chopped them into pea-sized bits and expected them to melt, like you heard in the Nestle story. They did not, and she liked the effect. As you said, while fanciful, this is definitely one made up by the marketing department. There's no possible way an exceptional chef like Wakefield would think the chocolate would somehow just permeate into the cookie and turn it into a chocolate one. I mean, Baker's chocolate wouldn't do that. There's no reason that Nestle's would have. It just doesn't make sense. Also, as we saw, Wakefield was meticulous, and the idea that she would run out of chocolate is, like, frankly preposterous.
Yeah.
There is a great book, as I want to do in these episodes. If you want to read more about the history of chocolate cookies, go look up the Great American Chocolate Chip Cookie Book by Carolyn Wyman. And this is one idea that she says that, like, she was an exceptional chef. She was so meticulous. There's no way she would just run out of Baker's chocolate. Another version of the story is kind of similar, was that she'd run out of nuts, and so she used chocolate instead, which makes a little bit more sense. One version is that she ran out of nuts because of the Depression-era shortage. I don't really know. There's another story in Wyman's book in which the vibrations of one of the mixers in the kitchen toppled over some chocolate on the shelf, which fell into the batter of butter cookies and broke apart. This one comes from George Boucher and Carolyn Cavanaugh, who both used to work at the restaurant, so it's a little bit true. But as Wyman says in her book, Boucher comes out the hero of this tale by persuading Wakefield to try baking the cookies rather than following her initial inclination to throw them out. And while possible, what about the wrappers? Did she just have random chocolate chilling on a shelf? What does this... I'm so confused by this story. It makes just as little sense.
I can imagine wrapperless chocolate. I feel like that's pretty, especially if you're in an industrial like size kitchen, you probably have tubs of it ready to go.
I'm not convinced, but it's the most likely of any of the like fanciful stories that abound. So the real story is a lot more boring. Ruth and her pastry cook at the time, Sue Brides, just came up with the recipe in their kitchen.
Yeah, like smart inventors do. Honestly, I like this version better.
Right.
Somebody was like, wow, this would be delicious.
It doesn't need to be made up by mistake. She could be like, you know what, this is going to be a cool idea. I'm going to try it out. And it worked.
Okay, listen, the theme of this episode is going to be sexism because there's a lot of that in the whole Betty Crocker thing. But also the fact that rather than being like, this woman invented this tasty treat, they were like, no, this idiot accidentally spilled some chocolate chips and thought they would melt. Hurt her. Like they turn it into this story of, like, they make it seem like an incompetent person was just like, whoopsie. And the reality was that, no, she was very adept at what she does. Like, that was her job. She was very talented at it, and she had a great idea, and it paid off and got famous. Like, why is that not the story that's told here? I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about that.
So what's actually wild about it is that a lot of the previous workers and maitresses and chefs that used to work there, they're the ones who are telling this story still. It's not that, like, just no one told the real story. It's that, like, even people that were there are telling the kind of change story. But also, it was really interesting to read that Ruth didn't want to talk about it very much. It wasn't until 1970, so I think 1936 to 1970, that she like finally opened up about it. I think at one point she like said, everyone knows the story of chocolate chip cookies, and then didn't say anything about the story of chocolate chip cookies. But I think she didn't want she was a businesswoman, she was an inventor, she like had a popular restaurant. She didn't want this like one thing to be the only thing people remembered her for. But honestly, I kind of wish she had, because that's kind of ingenious. And I'd much rather read the Nestle story of being like, hey, this is all due to Ruth Wakefield and her amazing decision. So, officially, she told reporters in the 1970s that she had been serving thin butterscotch nut cookies with ice cream. This was something that wasn't even on the menu, but it was so popular with all of the guests. Everybody seemed to love it, but I was trying to give them something different, so I came up with the Toll House cookie. And Ruth Wakefield's Toll House tried and true recipes from around 1940. You can find a recipe for nut tea wafers or refrigerator cookies, which are very similar to the chocolate crunch cookies that would eventually become the Toll House classic. So that's the most likely story, that she was like, these cookies are great. What can I do to change them?
Yeah.
And so she'd had ideas from traveling, and she tried things in college, and she decided to try chocolate in her recipe. As simple as that.
Wow. Yeah. There you have it.
Well, the story goes a little bit longer. After the success of the recipe in several Boston-based newspapers, Betty Crocker, which I assume we'll be talking about soon, helped grow the fame of the chocolate chip cookie on their radio program. And then, due to the success of her restaurant and the chocolate crunch cookies, as they were called in her cookbook, Nestle's sales of chocolate started to take off. And so in 1939, they bought the rights to the Toll House name and the right to print the recipe on the back of every Toll House chocolate bar.
So they've been doing that since 1939?
Exactly.
Wow.
It used to be a bar that you would buy.
Right.
You'd chop it up yourself. They eventually made it into little bits. And I think probably just because manufacturing became easier, they eventually created the morsel, which is their their copyrighted name for the chocolate chips. And as I said, it's still printed on the back of every Nestle morsel bag. Fun fact, during the Second World War, chocolate chip cookies became a national and then international success. So New England soldiers who received them in care packages shared them with their fellow soldiers from other places that weren't New England. And soon they were writing home telling everyone across America, please send me some of those Toll House cookies. I thought they were spectacular. Ruth got inundated with hundreds of letters asking for the recipe. And even when it spread to Britain, eventually that cookie recipe would become the Maryland brand of chocolate chip cookies. No idea why it's Maryland, but they have chocolate chip cookies that are based on our original recipes.
Wow.
As I said, the Toll House Inn no longer exists. You can still visit the sign, and there's a little plaque where the sign was.
Where the inn was?
Sorry, yeah, where the inn was. The Toll House Inn burned down on New Year's Eve in 1984, which was like 7 years after Ruth's death. I think they'd sold the place at least 10 years or more earlier, and is now the home of a Wendy's and a Walgreens. But due to Whitman town requests, they were required to put up a Toll House sign and a little memorial to the old Toll House restaurant. And so you can go visit that little plaque there. It tells the wrong story, but it is the original location of the Toll House Inn.
Wow.
Another fun fact real quick. The Toll House was never a toll house. The road they were on at one point may have been a toll road, but the Toll House never was a toll house for real. And the 1709 marketing on the sign is made up by both Nestle and the Wakefields. That house was built in 1817. So amongst the Nestle marketing about the story of the chocolate chip cookie and the marketing by the Wakefields, they did a lot of work to make it seem like this was an old classic recipe, and it's become one now, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of wishy-washy in the middle. I've talked for far too long. Let's have a quick time for tea moment.
I'm just so impressed, and I think this whole episode has really taught me. I wasn't expecting to learn much, right? Like, I was like, this is just, it's chocolate chip cookies. That's it. That's what is there to learn. But I'm realizing that this is really, this whole episode is going to be about how much of the American sort of like cultural zeitgeist is influenced by corporate marketing schemes, and like how many of our cultural icons are just like, and cultural myths are just companies trying to sell a product.
I want Hats Off to Bake Off to be all about encouraging home bakers. And so if we can dismantle some of these like myths and get people to start baking from home, that's exactly the kind of thing I want to do with this podcast.
Heck yeah.
So are you drinking anything today?
Just water. I'm trying to flush out the just enormous amount of sugar I consumed while eating my version of the chocolate chip cookie just now. I'm just trying to like rinse it all out of me.
I got me my classic Diet Coke. I have my cookie sitting next to me that I've eaten far too many of them in the past 2 days. Tell me a bit about the cookie you made.
Okay, yeah. So as Nick mentioned earlier, we decided that it would be a little too boring for us to simply swap our tried and true cookie recipes and instead wanted to try different sort of viral or famous versions of that original. And so I chose to do, and let me see if I can find their official name. It's, I guess, just the giant crinkled chocolate chip cookies that got sort of internet famous a couple years ago. And they are from the blogger. Her name, I think, is pronounced Sarah Kiefer. And so this is her recipe. And then it sort of went huge. And then I used her version of the recipe that's on like the New York Times cooking website. And basically what they are, they're enormous chocolate chip cookies with a little bit more sugar and a little bit less flour that are then sort of like mounded into giant third of a cup balls onto a baking sheet, and then sort of halfway through the baking time you start to like you like open the oven, reach in, pick up the baking sheet, and then like drop it down on the oven racks and sort of bang it down.
What?
Yeah, to flatten it out.
What?
Yeah, so while it's all like poofed up, you drop it, and then every like 2 to 3 minutes or so you keep doing that until they're fully baked. And that dropping and then re-rising and dropping and re-rising creates all these little wrinkles or folds. And that's supposed to make it like sort of have the best combo of the like crunchy outside, but then with a really chewy middle. And because you're dropping it, you pretty much lose all of those air holes. So it has none of that cakey texture.
You gotta tell me how these went. I need to know if they taste, I need to know more about them.
Okay, let me tell you. It went very well. They look exactly, maybe mine are a little less wrinkled, but I think what I could have done to make them more wrinkly is to sort of wait a little bit longer into the baking to begin to start to smack them down, because that would have given them more time to sort of set each set of wrinkles. But tasting them and eating them, I just like the original better. They're a little like almost toffee-ish around the outside. They're so sugary, and they almost get that sort of like toffee pull and then crispness on the outside. And because there's a little less flour and because you're sort of bashing all of the air out of it, they feel greasy. So it's like greasy, buttery, and then like chewy in the middle. I don't get it.
How about you try like freezing them or eating them like the next day? I kind of want to know if it changes the way that they end up. Do they like end up drying out anymore? Or
Yeah.
would they taste better if you were to freeze them?
That's a good question. I have them in a cookie jar right now. We had to cut them into quarters to fit them into the cookie jar. So I will give you an update tomorrow on how because you're right. I do tend to like the texture sometimes of a cookie better the next day once it sort of sets a little bit more. So it's definitely possible that will be the case for these cookies as well. Overall, my rating, 7.5 out of 10. Still yummy. Don't get the hype. Hey there, listeners. This is future Malory chiming in to say that Nick was right. Letting the cookies rest overnight was definitely a great idea, and they tasted much better the next day. Way less greasy, much better texture, and just what made them so nice is they were just chewy, and definitely chewier than like my traditional Betty Crocker recipe that I normally would use. So I've updated my rating to a 9 out of 10. And they still get the -1 because they weren't as delicious as I wanted them to be straight out of the oven, which is my favorite time to eat cookies, let's be real.
I also made a interesting internet famous chocolate chip cookie. My pick was one that I think is a little bit more recent. And this comes from Alison Roman's Dining In cookbook. And they are salted butter and chocolate chunk shortbread.
Yum.
And these were really popular. They're big and they're bold. They're very lightly browned and they're very flat. They've got like caramelized sugar on the outside of them. There is no eggs in the recipe whatsoever. There's no raising agent. It's just cold butter and flour and salt, vanilla and chocolate chips and stuff like that. And they're they're shortbread, so they're very crumbly. It's not chewy in the slightest. You egg wash the outside and dip them in demerara sugar. I had to use cane sugar, but same idea is that you're just kind of cooking these thick, cut, frozen discs that don't spread at all. And the caramel's on the outside because there's sugar, but like it's more about the like dense, thick shortbread cookie than it is about the chocolate. I can confirm that they've been sitting in the kitchen at like 90 degrees because we don't have central AC. And so the chocolate is still very melty, which is great.
A cookie hack.
Cookie hack, don't have AC. Live in Boston where central AC doesn't
And
exist.
cry all the time. But your cookies will taste great. The salt from your sweat is really just like adds another flavor element.
Oh, no.
It's to die for.
But I'd say around the same, a 7.5, 7, maybe an 8, because they are still very good cookies. But like, I don't think they quite beat a chocolate chip cookie.
Yeah.
I will definitely have to post these. I'll also need to grab another bite because they're tempting me. But
This is fair.
Have any of your friends made any chocolate cookies recently?
I'm sure they have. None that I'm seeing, but they're pretty popular.
I had a friend show me off some of her cookies, and they look amazing. If you make cookies, any kind is well loved. They don't have to be chocolate chip. Show us your cookies. We'd love to talk about them. Again, my friend Luca Locke, who does D&D with me, she sent me her Christina Tosi approved confetti cookies.
Yum. Oh my gosh, I see the Christina Tosi comment in the Instagram post you have here. That is amazing.
Yep.
I'm going to have to tell my friend who's, oh my gosh.
My friend says they taste like sugar cookies had adorable little babies with a birthday cake. Christina replies, perfect description.
Oh my gosh.
She also made Christina's compost cookies, which are like brown sugar and coffee and potato chips and butterscotch and pretzels. Ugh, they sound so good.
Yum.
She's made London Fog shortbread.
I want to try that so bad. That sounds so up my alley.
I love Earl Grey. And then the weirdest one of all, corn cookies. So this is another Tosi recipe.
All right, yeah, it sounds very Tosi.
These are bright yellow, and they are just like messing with my brain. They look like cookies, but they're also made like they look like cornbread.
They look kind of
I want to try them.
Strawberry shortcake biscuits a little bit.
They do, but very yellow.
Yeah,
very,
I would
very
definitely try them.
yellow.
That sounds really good.
I'm gonna have to add these to our endless list of things to bake because they look real heckin' good.
Yum, 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 yum.
Shall we move on?
Happy to. So you talked about Toll House. I honestly did not know that they are like pretty much the original chocolate chip cookie. Like that's how it all started. I just assumed it was a random Nestle brand. But I also had some pretty false assumptions about Betty Crocker as well, who...
Not Betty.
Yeah. So she's 99 years old. She was born in 1921.
Wait. She is 99 years old?
She really can never die because she never existed in the first place as a human.
Oh, no.
She was, quote unquote, born in 1921. She was created by the marketing team at a company called Washburn Crosby that would later become General Mills.
Whoa.
So she's a fictional character. Did you know this? I'm genuinely curious if you knew this or not.
So that was the thing, is that I sort of knew Betty Crocker was fake, kind of like Aunt Jemima isn't really a real person. But
Right.
when you said she is 99, I was like, excuse me, what?
You thought that I was going to be like, and here she is.
Or like the fact, like
No.
if she was based on someone that she was still alive, I was like, what?
She is based on basically an amalgamation of all of the women who were working in the home ec department at this company, which in and of itself is... I'm going to get into all the feelings I have about this in just a minute. You'll hear them.
Yeah, please.
I've got a
please
lot of
do,
them.
'cause I have some right now, and I think we'll save for them until you're ready to say them.
Okay, wonderful. So this whole Betty Crocker thing began with an ad that Gold Medal flour, which is a brand of flour. I literally just like use some in the cookies I bake today. It's not I usually go for King Arthur because they're a co-op and we love co-ops, but I think Gold Medal was just like what happened to be around in the flour shortage that is COVID-19. Woof. So it all started in 1921. There was an ad that they placed in the Saturday Evening Post that was a puzzle. And so contestants were to complete the puzzle and send it in for a prize, which I think was a pincushion shaped like a bag of flour, because why not?
I know
and they got so many
sort
responses.
Of sexist, but I still love it. I want a pincushion.
Isn't
that
that
looks
like
a bag of
like
flour?
yeah?
I don't do
Yes.
sewing, but I still want it.
Well, that'll be the new Hoppo merch. We'll get. Ooh, that's so not allowed legally, but it'll happen.
We could do hats off to
probably.
Bake Off branded flour bags.
We could do like Gould medal, like change on letter. Anyways, so they got so many responses to this puzzle competition, and it was around 30,000 completed puzzles, and most of them were accompanied by sort of letters or requests with baking questions. So they had, completed the puzzle, sent it in. We're like, also, while I have you, why isn't my cake rising? And how do you make a cherry pie? Like things like that. And so it was 1921. The Washburn Crosby Company was pretty much, that department was all male, to no one's surprise.
Okay, wait. I need to get into this right now. They are a company that sells food. What is the distinction of a home economics department?
So they were basically like the test kitchen.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
And I assume the home economics department was like mostly women.
Exactly. And so the marketing department really didn't know how to deal with this inundation of baking questions. And so previously what they would have done is just like basically walk around the company and like find the nearest woman and be like, wait, help me with this. Or they would go and they would pull all the women workers there, whether they were service staff, or if like secretaries or in the home ec department, and ask them to answer those questions. But at this point now, because of this ad, they had so many questions that they were like, this is not a sustainable solution for us anymore. And so they were still sort of like gathering information from all of the women on the various teams, but they didn't feel comfortable replying to these questions and signing a male name. They thought the advice would be more trustworthy coming from a female name. The quote from somewhere I read said, Samuel Gale, who was in the advertising department, suspected that women would rather hear from other women who knew their way around a kitchen.
I really wish that the listener could see the face I'm making right now.
Yep.
Because I'm so conflicted. Because on the one hand, normally a man would be like, oh, I know better, and mansplain it through and through. And so it's a little bit of a victory.
No.
But also it's not, because they're like, only women know the kitchen. And it's like, I don't know how to feel.
And it gets worse because their response to this, instead of, hiring a woman to be in the marketing department, that answer, their response was to create a fictional woman named Betty Crocker.
What?
Her job was to answer all of the questions sent in by customers and sort of be the, she ended up writing, they had a newspaper columns, that was sort of her job. She was answering all of these questions that were coming in. Meanwhile, probably they were mostly written by the male staff, and then later it was taken over by somebody who we will talk about in a second. But yeah, that was basically their answer. Instead of hiring an actual woman, they were like, let's just make one up. And so Betty Crocker was born.
So they were answering, the men were answering, pretending to be Betty Crocker.
The men were answering using answers from the women's staff, probably without paying them for their labor. That's just an assumption. I don't know that. But they were probably just like, hey, even though you're doing 500 other things, can you also answer this baking question for me? Because you're a woman and you know how that works, right? Okay, thanks. Bye. That I won't give you any money for it, because that's just
I love that your early 1900s hetero man also sounds like a gay man, so. Okay, bye.
Bye.
You're so queer, it just comes out in all
I
your
can't
characters.
not. It's impossible. So then, to sort of lend to this lie, more lies, they had the women at Washburn Crosby compete in a signature competition And so a secretary there named Florence Lindeberg, she won the signature competition, and it's her signature. Whenever you see like the Betty Crocker label that has the signature of Betty Crocker, it's actually the handwriting of Florence Lindeberg.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
And so then in 1924, Betty went from signing these letters to having an actual voice, because they began airing a cooking radio show called the Betty Crocker Cooking School of the Air. So for the first couple years, that Betty, I guess, was voiced by Blanche Ingersoll. And then in 1926, it was taken over by Marjorie Husted. And so the home ec department was then sort of renamed the Betty Crocker Homemaking Service in 1929. There were 40 staff members working in this. That was, again, basically like a test kitchen space. And then Husted was the director. Marjorie Husted is an absolute badass. I'm obsessed with her after reading about her today. She basically was responsible for, she like wrote and created content for this cooking show and was responsible for really launching Betty Crocker and like making her a national name. Later they do a television show and things like that, but she just like had all of these ideas, and she was really, really good at understanding how to use this brand image to just like launch all of this product series and these services. And so she, in 1951, years later, in a speech to the American Association of University Women, Husted said, "Management is dominated by men, and there is no indication of interest on the part of the employers for change." So she retired in 1950. She retired from General Mills and was earning about 1/4 of the salary of their top salesman, even though General Mills executives told Husted that she had done more for the company's sales than any other person. So after that, she goes on to start her own consultancy, which I think is like, she was like, you know what, fuck y'all, I'm starting my own business. And anyways, Marjorie Husted was a badass, and she was the voice of Betty for a few years, and after that was responsible for basically just the huge trajectory and growth and like making Betty Crocker a national icon that she is today. So that part is pretty dope. The not dope part is that she was kind of treated like shit. That's that on that. I'm like trying to present this and also stay chill, and I can't.
I think we can say, forget Nestle, forget General Mills. Let's celebrate
the
Marjorie
women
Husted and Ruth Wakefield.
Exactly. And so she was later celebrated in 1948, right before retiring from General Mills. She was awarded one of 6 women to be awarded the Women of the Year Award of the Women's National Press Club, and that was awarded to her by President Truman. And then she also was a consultant for the National Food Conservation Program of the USDA. She was named Advertising Woman of the Year in 1949. She's got a lot of credit that was awarded to her later, but honestly I think more is still due, especially because Betty Crocker, the name, is just so renowned that like, and it's the same for Toll House. Like I'm like, oh yes, Toll House cookies. I'm never like, oh, Ruth Wakefield cookies. Same thing here. I'm like, Betty Crocker cookies. I never think about Marjorie Husted. And so just a little bit more about the sort of Betty Crocker brand. It was in 1936 that they had the first portrait commissioned, and this is sort of more about the women at Washburn Crosby. The picture was basically a blend of all of the women staff. They just were like, they wanted, so like the whole idea behind Betty Crocker to begin with was they just wanted her to be like a kind and stereotypical woman, I guess. And so like her name was chosen because it sounds warm and friendly and kind. And then they just sort of like smushed together a bunch of faces of women and were like, this lady looks friendly.
That is one of the things I did look up, is just Betty Crocker through the ages.
Yeah.
It's sort of a fascinating bit of history of just looking at the images of basically like what was the look of that decade.
So I brought a prop from my kitchen. We have it.
That no one can see.
That no one can see. My family has the 8th edition of the Betty Crocker's Cookbook, which originally came out in 1950. And they have a little intro about the heritage of Betty Crocker's Cookbook. And they even say in 1936, the Betty Crocker name, by then famous, was given a face when the first official portrait of Betty Crocker was commissioned. In the years that followed, there were 5 other quote-unquote sittings. The 7th and most recent portrait in the series appears in a place of honor on the back cover of this book. As the previous ones reflected changing times, the current Betty Crocker portrait reflects the 1980s. So I definitely urge people to look this up. It's just crazy that they were like purposely manipulating this picture to best sell these products to sort of the people, and more specifically the women and the like housewives of that era. And then my also favorite, least favorite, another just like in the gross history of American capitalism. And in 1996, I think, the portrait was purposely given an olive skin tone so that she would be more ethnically ambiguous. So they're just like pandering to people. I don't even like.
In what year?
1996.
Oh, wow.
So they were like, oh, now we think it's acceptable. Like, I don't know. So like they created this woman, this like what was supposed to be the stereotypical, like the basically the ideal. Like she was called the first lady of cooking. You know what I mean? Like she was
definitely
like
one in there that looks a lot like Jackie Kennedy. Like
that was purposeful.
I mean, exactly. They're trying to like capture what people think of as like
the ideal housewife.
Exactly.
And that goes along with like pretty much all the sexism and racism that goes along with like that idea of like what that should look like. That's all there. And again, it's all just to sell more things and to make you trust. Like basically what they're doing is they're trying to create an image that you will trust to sell you, to like, give you recipes that are tasty.
Yeah.
And that's wild to me. Like thinking about it objectively, like before I was just like, this is the best cookie recipe. And I never really dug deeper into that, but it's just so weird. And she's often, I think you mentioned pretty early on, she's often compared to Aunt Jemima. The difference is that she's just not overtly fucking racist. Like, and there was actually eventually a woman who was writing her lines, but they're often compared to one another because they were fictitious women who were designed and created to sell a product that really was not created by women and had very little to do with them.
I learned just today that Famous Amos is a real person who created cookies and was like the mascot for the cookies for a while until he eventually got like slowly pushed out of the company. But like Famous Amos is a real person, a real black man who is basically no longer associated with the cookie.
I had no idea.
So look him up too. Maybe we'll do an episode on him because he sounds cool.
Yeah.
But again, there is a real quote unquote famous Amos.
Wow.
I'm sure the story is still a little bit sketchy. So
yeah, I feel like the moral of the chocolate chip cookie story is, one, please recognize and pay women.
Yep.
First of all. And second, boy, American capitalism is creepy.
But it's one of the easiest and most recognizable bakes that I'm sure any American or international cook could make at any time. It should be ubiquitous with a home cook, with families and of any shape or kind, that even the pickiest eaters in the world love chocolate chip cookies. How can you really go wrong? Well, we saw all the ways you could go wrong. But if you're baking them at home, there's no way you can go wrong. And you can make them any way you want. Do whatever you want with them. Make them cake, make them thin, make them crispy, make them chewy. Alton Brown has done so many variations on chocolate chip cookies. You can find hundreds upon hundreds of recipes for different styles of chocolate chip cookies, and they're all spectacular. I should mention this because I forgot to say it earlier. Originally, the Toll House cookie recipe only had one egg, and later on added a second egg. So originally, the Toll House chocolate crunch cookie was more like the current Betty Crocker one.
Yeah, they're probably just like you said, like I don't think I mentioned this, but basically the way that they got those recipes was sort of going around the country when they would do these shows. The website I read said that they would like ask high school girls to like ask either their moms or their home cooks they knew, and just to like see what they were doing in their kitchens. So it just doesn't surprise me. Like travel and research was a big part of recipe development there. So it doesn't surprise me that they probably knew of Ruth Wakefield and were able to basically get her recipe. So it doesn't surprise me that it's similar.
Marjorie Husted was the one who spoke to Ruth and said, hey, I have this great idea for a radio program I want to do about cooks in restaurants across America. I'd love to do a segment in your restaurant. So they did actually talk. They knew each other. And she did a whole program segment at the Toll House restaurant.
Okay, I can no longer be in here trying to create fake competition between these two brands. First of all, because they're both like owned by multinational corporations, and I'm just like feel kind of icky about that. But then secondly, because apparently, wow, if those two women were bros, like who am I to now create this like fake strife between them?
Love both. Well, don't love the brands equally. Love the women
equally.
They are both spectacular women in their own rights.
Yeah.
In their own fields, they did a spectacular thing.
This is the queer love story I never knew I needed.
I ship it. Do you have anything else to say about Betty Crocker?
No, I mean, I'm sure I do somewhere deep in there, but our listeners sure as hell don't need to hear it.
Well, as we said, this was an episode we wanted to talk about one of the bakers that we didn't get a chance to talk about in the last 10 episodes. Today, we're giving a hats off to Richard Burr. Richard Burr was one of the finalists at the Great British Bake Off in Series 5. You can find him now as Richard P. Burr on Twitter and on Instagram, or visit his website, richardburr.london. Richard, as we know, is the fourth generation builder and does plenty of baking both before and after Bake Off. On his website, you can check out some of the things he's done, such as developed an outdoor cooking demo for bread on a campfire or camping stove. His wife specialized in medieval food history at university, and so the two of them developed a medieval bread technique class, which sounds so cool. I got to go check that out.
What? Sorry.
He wrote a book. No, you're fine. This is so cool. He wrote a book called BIY, or Bake It Yourself, which is just chock-a-block.
I love that you say that now.
So Richard's aesthetic. I want to incorporate chock-a-block into my regular vocabulary. But it's such his aesthetic because it's like him baking with like a cake and also like power tools in the background. It's hilarious. He's actually done bakes for the home improvement company Steel. So he's made like a chainsaw out of cake. It was very cute. But speaking of cute, he says his first memory of baking is with his mom making, get this, bread tortoises.
That's so cute.
I included this picture because they're perfect, but bread tortoises are evidently a real thing, and I love them. Got little arms and legs and little head. I think it's so cute. I'm sorry I had to share that. Also, as a teen, he had a job washing dishes at a local bakery, which I think Paul did too. The Burr family recently adopted a black Cocker Spaniel named Steven, which is a great name for a dog. So you can check out his Instagram or his website for lots of pictures of him and his family, lots of his bakes, his camping and his baking and his whatever else. He's renovating his family home now, and so he's got a lot on his plate. He's doing literally so much.
Wow. And that brings us to the end of our bonus episode today. So I hope you enjoyed it. Our next bonus episode will be doing a bit of a sharp left, but really not, actually. This was surprisingly...
Very much
I thought it was going to be like two completely different things, but really this sort of led us very nicely. It was a great segue into next bonus episode where we're going to be exploring the interconnections between racism, colonialism, and baking. I'm very excited. I feel like baking is something, and I'll get more into this, but I do want to just give a little bit of a preview. I feel like baking is something that we associate with like wholesomeness and, oh, it's just so nice and sweet. And there's so much darkness that's hidden under all of that. And I really want to just dig in there and uncover it. So I'm very excited, and I hope you are as excited as we are for next week as well. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, please tell your friends and family to check us out on our social media or subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. Every subscription and download helps us out tons.
We would love it if you would tweet about us and share how much you like the show. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at HotBowPod, as well as on Facebook at facebook.com/HotBowPod. That's HOTBOPOD. You can find links to all of our social media accounts. I've recently made a HotBowPod subreddit and a Discord and a bunch of other things that if you want to communicate with us, there's so many ways.
He's a man obsessed.
Very much so. You can sign up to be notified whenever we release an episode on our website, hotbowpod.com. Also, you can access the Hats Off to Bake Off store on our website or by going to shop.hotbowpod.com One last time, HOTBOPOD.com.
The links that we use to make our chocolate chip cookies are posted on our website. Find them by navigating to episodes, look for the post for this episode, and try them out for yourself. If you do bake them, let us know how they went. Do you have a favorite? What's your favorite chocolate chip cookie? We would love to know.
I'd also like to give a hats off to Peter Lalish, who wrote our intro and our outro music. You can find Peter on Fiverr as PW Lalish, as well as on Bandcamp under the name AKLF. As Marjorie Husted said, good housekeeping is an art, and it's about time it is treated as such. On your marks.
Get set. Bake.
As Marjorie Husted said, good housekeeping is an art, and it's about time it is treated as such. On your marks.
Get set. Bake. Fuck.
Bake. Excuse you?
I can tell. I think we're out of I think your video is out of sync with your audio, and it's really fucking me up. Will you just cut that, or should we try that again?